10 years of dating Wesley Spencer. I answered his call by mistake. Wesley, our kitty gave birth to a litter of kittens. It was a gentle female voice and the caller's note was, "Little cat. He's taking a shower. Call me back later." I hung up the phone coldly. That night, Wesley picked up the clothes scattered on the ground like crazy, put them on casually and rushed out. And I destroyed our home and wiped out everything I had. Boarded a plane to a foreign country. 3 years later, Wesley stopped me on a vacation island. He stared at the little kid next to him who looked somewhat like him, and asked with red eyes, "Mine?" 1. Wesley was so energetic that I couldn't even open my eyes. The phone next to me kept ringing, and I answered it in a daze. "Wesley, our kitty gave birth to a litter of kittens." It was clearly a gentle and lovely female voice, but my head felt like it was exploding and I lost all desire to sleep. I took a quick glance and saw the caller ID was Little Cat. "Wesley," the other person called out. I took a deep breath and responded in a calm tone. "He's in the shower, call back later." The person on the other end paused for a moment and then hung up the phone. When Wesley came out of the bathroom, his lower body was only covered with a bath towel. The water drops that had not been wiped off his body slid down the lines of his muscles and soaked into the bath towel. There are still a few fresh scratches on his body, my masterpiece. "Why don't you get some more sleep?" He stared at my collarbone, which was dotted with red marks, and his eyes darkened a little. As he was about to lower his head to get closer to me, I handed him the phone. He frowned in dissatisfaction, took away his phone and threw it casually, then held my hands, and his breath wandered over my body vaguely. "Little cat," I said. The person buried in my neck stopped moving. "She called you and told you that your baby was born." Wesley suddenly regained consciousness, picked up the clothes scattered beside the bed like crazy, put them on casually and rushed out. I was alone in the home we had decorated together. Watch him run towards another girl. 2. The girl was his blind date and they started contacting each other 3 months ago. It took less than a month from the time they met to the time they confirmed their relationship, and they even raised a stray cat together. She shared with him delicious food, music, and even an ordinary cloud. He responded to everything, took a photo of the dinner, cut out my traces and then sent it to her. My chat history with Wesley is all about work. Only when we are making love in the middle of the night will he whisper "wife" in my ear, a noun that adds interest. But I held it in my heart like a treasure for 10 whole years. I laughed. He took out Wesley's cigarette box from the drawer. Maybe it was because I hadn't smoked for a long time, so I choked. I coughed up tears. My colleague Mia sent me a message. "Sister Eliza Holmes, did you know that Spencer is always in a relationship? Wesley and I have always been very businesslike in public, and we often quarrel over disagreements. No one dared to imagine that Wesley would put me on his lap and tease me. What can I do with the person I find? Just pamper him. What an anti-human scene." And today, Wesley added the girl to the company's group chat. "Hello everyone, I am Jane, the assistant of Mr. Spencer. Thank you for your guidance." Her group note is Wesley's little cat. Many things can be understood without being stated explicitly. I don't know how Wesley explained the call I received. All I know is that Jane added everyone in the company. Check one by one. Mia sent me an eye-rolling emoji. I'm already annoyed at work, and now I'm being treated as an imaginary love rival. After a while, Jane posted a circle of friends with a picture of a cup of green tea. Caption: "Don't touch other people's phones at will, it's uncultured." Wesley gave a thumbs up. With an expressionless face, I swung the baseball bat beside me and smashed the house. Seeing the mess on the ground, I smiled with satisfaction. When the housekeeping team arrived, I sat on the only sofa that was not being yelled at, staring blankly. It's not that it's so precious, it's just that I'm tired. Really so tired. "Miss Holmes, are you all right?" Perhaps because he saw that I was in a very sorry state, the visitor asked me a question. Wesley's chat box was still stuck at 2 hours ago. I shook my head gently and gave a genuine smile. "Take all the women's stuff out of here." 3. Wesley and I were college classmates. He grew up in a compound, and his family had made arrangements for him. All he had to do was obey and follow. But he was a stubborn person, and after breaking off ties with his family, He started his own business. I was his first partner. He provides the money and I provide the labor. I asked him why he chose me. There are many people in college who are better than me. He twirled his pen absent-mindedly, looking at me intently. A smile from the heart. He said, "I like you." I was stunned. That unwillingness to admit defeat. My ambitious vitality was something he admired. Later, this ambition became something he was afraid of. But Jane is different from me. She is very simple. The kind of marriage partner he wants is exactly this kind of girl who has no ambitions and stays around him. He was clear-headed, knew what he needed, and put it into practice. He and I are the same kind of people, resisting and struggling like dormant predators. Because of this, we have a tacit understanding and interact with each other in the business world. The circuitous tactics at the dinner table and the ruthlessness in actual combat help us rise to the top. The night we made our first pot of gold, we all got drunk and lay on the bed, with red banknotes scattered all around us. Wesley turned his head and looked at me, with an emotion in his eyes that I didn't understand. "Eliza, you're awesome." I smiled and said, "You're not bad either." Due to the high intensity of work, Wesley, the young master, finally fell ill and had a high fever. I was busy taking care of him, but he turned over and covered me under him. I still remember that the corners of his eyes were red and his whole body was red like cooked braised shrimps due to the high fever. "I like you." This time there is no pause and no suffix. He could no longer control his emotions, and lingering around my nose was the faint scent of tobacco mixed with mint. The tiny whimpers were crushed into his stomach. Very hot. It's so hot that people's hearts are boiling and sinking together. 4. I moved back to my own house. I have become pampered over the years. I developed a habit of being attached to my bed and couldn't sleep all night. When I returned to the company, I ran into Wesley. I nodded politely and distantly. Wesley frowned. "Wesley." Jane trotted over and stood between us. "Hello, I'm Wesley's fiancée." I nodded and said, "Hello." When she heard my voice, her face cracked. I didn't say any more pleasantries and went straight into the elevator. "Eliza, is that it?" Jane caught up, followed closely by Wesley. "I often hear Wesley mention you. You are very capable at work. However, women should not often show up in public and hang out with men. It's not good. Going shopping with your girlfriends and getting beauty treatments is relaxing and comfortable. It's better to leave work to men. Isn't that right, Wesley?" Wesley rubbed her hair with extreme tenderness. "Do I dare to say that it's wrong?" I didn't react to Jane's provocation. She probably recognized my voice and was anxious to show her affection in front of me and declare her ownership of Wesley. "In the company, please call me Mr. Holmes. If you don't know how to do that, the HR department will arrange training for you, including food and accommodation." I ignored the reactions of the people behind me and tapped the place where Jane had touched. However, my reaction angered Wesley. After he sent Jane away, he went straight into my office. I frowned in dissatisfaction. "Mr. Spencer." Knocking on the door is basic etiquette. I bit the last 4 words very hard. I returned all of Jane's words to him. He curled his lips, bent down, and held me between his arms and the sofa. "You were the one who opened the door last night." His eyes swept across the hem of my skirt, hinting at something. "Pa!" I slapped him without hesitation. His fair face was instantly stained with bright red fingerprints. Wesley rubbed his cheek, smiled, and stood up to sit opposite me. "I have had the villa in the west of the city transferred to your name, and the piece of land you had your eye on will soon be approved." Wesley half lifted his eyelids, his expression calm. "Let's part ways in peace. He always hits me where it hurts." I handed him the knife. Finally, all of them were inserted into my body. At this moment he was high and mighty, just like my so-called stepfathers. While talking about love, we buy love with money. The lover's game, which is played for the sake of novelty, is beautified as a game played in the name of love. When Jane came over with her lunchbox, she saw me splashing water on Wesley. She rushed in screaming and slapped me. I have never been in the habit of suffering losses. The only loss was probably the one I suffered at the hands of Wesley. My waving hand stopped in midair and was grabbed by Wesley. He stood in front of Jane and said angrily, "Eliza, this is not the place for you to go crazy." I raised my other hand and slapped him hard in the face. Looking at the symmetrical fingerprints on Wesley's face, I suddenly felt relieved. Without Wesley, could you, a woman, have reached your current position? Jane stepped forward to speak up for Wesley. You're fired. Why? Jane raised her head to make herself look more imposing. Just because I own 30% of the shares, and just because you broke into my office without permission and beat up the company's top executives. Jane panicked, her eyes evasive, and when she saw that Wesley didn't blame her, she continued to provoke me fearlessly. Wesley is the largest shareholder, and I am Wesley's fiancée. Who do you think you are? If anyone wants to leave, then you should leave. There was already a circle of people gathered at the office door. Wesley said nothing, acquiesced to her behavior and supported her. There is no need to continue this dispute. Okay, let's go. I will give you the shares I own at the market price. Wesley, I've done my best. Wesley, who had been silent the whole time, showed some flaws on his stern face after I took out the agreement. Perhaps he didn't expect that I had already prepared an agreement and was ready to leave. Jane had a smile on her face. She felt confident because she was favored. Who called the police? I covered my face and walked forward, stumbling a bit halfway. Comrade police officer, I was beaten. I feel dizzy and nauseous now. 5. After checking the injury at the hospital, it was found to be a mild concussion. If I refused to reconcile, Jane would have to be detained for at least a few days. Wesley gave a meaningful smile, looking like he had seen through the trick. Jane finally panicked and nervously grabbed the corner of Wesley's clothes. Wesley, I don't want to spend the night here. I'm scared. Wesley gently comforted her not to be afraid. He would support her. Once I have the money, I'm not someone who doesn't understand romance. After leaving the police station, Wesley pulled me into a dark place. For the sake of money, you really don't care about your shame. I hooked his tie and pulled hard. He had to lower his head to look at me at eye level. You should have thought about the consequences if you stepped on my face to show your support for the new guy. Wesley didn't get angry but smiled instead, raised his hand to hold my lower back and held me close to him. Control your temper. No man can stand you. I pushed him away in disgust and walked towards the parking lot. Wesley followed me and said in a neither light nor heavy voice, You know my mother. She has not been in good health in the past 2 years. Jane just happens to be what she likes. I ignored him and opened the car door, but Wesley raised his hand to block it. Eliza, I can give you everything except marriage. Roll. I slammed the car door shut and drove away. In the rearview mirror, he was standing with his hands in his pockets, facing away from the light, and his expression could not be seen clearly. The street light stretched his lonely shadow very long. 6. He was walking around in circles and picking his throat in the hospital bathroom. I made Wesley and Jane feel disgusted, but I also felt bad, so I went home and fell asleep immediately. When I woke up the next day, I received a call from my mother. Eliza, you haven't been home for dinner in a long time. I looked at the date and agreed. The person who opened the door for me was a stranger. Eliza, this is your Uncle Lawson. My mother introduced him to me. I sighed, my mom's new boyfriend. Different from the elegant and noble men in the past, this Uncle Lawson looked like a man who lived a normal life. At the dinner table, my mother diligently picked up food for me. Eliza, Uncle Lawson has a son who just graduated this year. Let him go to your company to help. Although I was well prepared, a trace of loneliness still flashed through my heart. I quit. Why did you quit your job? Did you make Spencer unhappy? My mother put down her chopsticks in surprise, thought about it, and suggested to me, I'll buy some fruit later and ask for mercy. Wesley doesn't seem like a kid who doesn't remember old ties. Bang! I smashed the chopsticks on the ground, making a crackling sound. My mother choked up and cried on Uncle Lawson's shoulder. This child has been stubborn since she was young. She will smash things and lose her temper when something doesn't go her way. If her father hadn't abandoned her, I wouldn't have had to raise a child alone and suffer all the cold stares. Is it easy for me? Uncle Lawson hugged my mother lovingly. He will be there to comfort me in the future, so my mother doesn't have to face all this alone. Yes, you are the only one in the world who is not at fault, and you are the most wronged. I sneered, no longer paying attention to the affectionate expressions behind me, and turned away. Since I was old enough to understand, being isolated and bullied made up my complete childhood. I'm just a bargaining chip my mother uses to trap my biological father. The repeated entanglements and attempts to retain her angered his wife. My mother could only take me to wander from one city to another. No one welcomed us and always tried to take advantage of my family. I drove those people away like a wild dog and fought for my legitimate rights. In their mouths, he became a petty, wild child without a father. It's not good to have no man in the family. We orphans and widows will be bullied. My mother has a soft heart. She places her hopes on men. She searches again and again, and new uncles approach with purpose. That year I was 12 years old. When I got home, I ran into a drunk man who pinned my mother to the ground and beat her. The dying person on the ground is my only relative in this world. I fought a grown man with all my strength. The man lost his mind and pulled out a knife. I actually breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that everything was finally over. But my mother threw herself in front of me and hugged me without hesitation, and her snow-white clothes were stained bright red inch by inch. I think, in this life we are destined to torture each other. 7. You have given so much to the company. Are you really willing to do that? Mia was the one I brought up, and she was very sad about my leaving. I propped my chin up and took a sip of sake. Willing. After 10 years of love-hate entanglement, I have also fantasized about the future. When the choice between the two arises, there is no winner. Damage is spilled and cannot be recovered. Leaving the market in time to stop loss is the best option. Seeing that I had no intention of turning back, Mia started complaining to me. In order to appease Jane, Wesley gave her a sinecure executive position in the company. Jane was suspicious all day long. She was wary and questioned every unmarried woman in the company. She set up all kinds of outrageous assessments and even required women not to wear makeup or skirts to work. Customers were not able to avoid this and therefore lost several orders. This is something I didn't expect. Wesley, who is always calm and steady, would allow such unreasonable behavior. Maybe the Wesley I knew was never the real him. Or maybe his preference for Jane was exceptional. But it has nothing to do with me anymore. It was drizzling the day we left the capital. My mother was busy building a relationship with her new son. She gave him a few words of advice and then hung up the phone. Before I boarded the plane, Gideon Ellis called me. He is Wesley's childhood friend. We have met several times and are quite familiar with each other. I don't know where I got the news that I was going abroad. Eliza, you don't have to hide abroad. I've got a game planned and Wesley will be coming too. Let's talk it out. We are still friends. 8. In the private room, Gideon held his cell phone with an unpleasant look on his face. On the other end of the phone, Eliza hung up directly. When I called again, only the mechanical female voice was heard. In an instant, the atmosphere in the private room dropped to freezing point. Wesley's eyes were extremely dim at this moment, suppressing his anger. He instructed this call. He originally thought that if he gave in, the other party would come down the stairs. Ask yourself, is he not good enough for her? He first noticed Eliza because of her beautiful face. Later, I was attracted by her unwillingness to admit defeat. He still remembered Eliza standing on the podium and questioning the principal about the fairness of the scholarship, the little figure resisting the secular rules. He admitted that Eliza was excellent. However, what the capital city lacks the least is gold. He gave her resources and connections, brought her to her current position, and even made their relationship public in front of friends. What else is she dissatisfied with? Wesley, if you can't let go, go get her back. Gideon's wife had just run away, so he gave her sincere advice. Wesley lit a cigarette irritably and snorted. It's just for fun. She really thinks she's a dish. Wesley appears to be nonchalant on the surface, but his recent abnormal behavior has proven that he is bluffing. For example, deliberately indulging Jane's mischief and having someone pass the message to Eliza. He also asked about Eliza's situation from time to time, and stopped downstairs of Eliza's house several times and then left. Gideon advised him several times to let him see his true heart. Wesley didn't care. Why did Eliza act so tough with him? But I just rely on the fact that he cares about me. He can give Eliza everything or take it all back. Now his relationship with his family has been reconciled. All it takes is one sentence. Many people rush to do things for him. What does it feel like when a calculating person loses everything? He was waiting for that day. The day Eliza had no other options, and the day she surrendered to him. At that time, considering their 10-year friendship, he would accept it reluctantly. 9. After turning off the computer, my world becomes unusually quiet. I spent the first 27 years of my life on the road, not daring to stop for a moment. It seems that if I stop, the world will abandon me. Eliza, what are you chasing? I ask myself. My heart feels empty without an answer. It is said that at the end of the world, anyone who has seen the northern lights will have their wishes come true. After landing in Northern Europe, I found a B&B to stay in. Wesley and I were here on business. But it was snowing at that time, so I hurried back home. There were many people with the same purpose as me, and coincidentally we all stayed in the same B&B. Some of them are friends, relatives, or lovers. In this way, we formed a temporary sightseeing team without any prior arrangement. There are no tall buildings in this town, only endless snow-capped mountains and fjords. The sunset glowed on the top of the white snow-capped mountains. An airplane took off in the afterglow, stirring up layers of seagulls that circled in the air, chirping. As night fell, the clouds piled up and there were only a few stars. But there are always more solutions than problems, and someone suggested chasing the light. A few of us rented a car, hired a local Aurora hunter, and started our childish light-chasing journey. The car drove along through the hazy night until a light appeared on the horizon. "It's the Aurora!" someone cheered excitedly. A ball of light that was the same color as the sky and water passed through layers of mountains and struck directly into the soul. "Why don't you make a wish?" someone asked me. I was speechless. Perhaps I once had many ideas and demands. For example, "Mom, could you please pay more attention to me?" For example, the years and years that followed with Wesley. But at this moment I couldn't utter a word. "I hope my mother's illness can get better." The boy prayed devoutly beside her. I put my hands together like the boys and silently said in my heart, "Then wish me good health and that all my wishes come true." Travelers by the campfire drank hot cocoa and told their stories. Some people promise to be together for the rest of their lives for love. Some people pray with their last hope that their loved ones will be safe. I have never been so calm and immersed in the moment. Before, all I could think about was weighing the pros and cons, risk analysis and return rate data confirmation of a thing. Being sentimental has always been a luxury for me, because once you fall into the abyss, no one gave me a hand and some even stepped on me. The appearance of Wesley allowed me to spare some time during the suffocating time to think about the emotional areas that I dared not touch. I told him over and over again about my shortcomings, my family, and my shortcomings. In order to scare him off, I am not a person worth paying for. But he walked towards me firmly again and again, affirming everything about me. And in the end, everything was broken and smashed into pieces. He stabbed the knife into my heart one after another. Bloody and extremely enjoyable. The heavy snow embraced me, and the tears in my eyes turned into frost. I spread my arms wide, immersed in dancing with the snow, responding to this imaginary comfort. "It's no big deal, Eliza." Thick black clouds were looming, and people were sighing in disappointment. "What bad luck. It's snowing. Let's go back." On the way back, an accident happened suddenly. The car rolled over several times and everything outside was white. "There's an avalanche." The voices of panic, blame, and self-pity filled my ears. I have imagined countless times what it would be like for a family to go to an amusement park. I can wear a beautiful bow, ride on my dad's shoulders, hide my thorns, and act like a real kid, pointing at my favorite stuffed doll and saying, "Mom, I want that." But at the moment of life and death, I was shocked. The bond between people is always temporary, whether it is family, friendship, or love. Just like now, the original complaints in the car turned into mutual encouragement. "We'll all be alive." Someone shouted and everyone started to work hard to break the window. Before this, we were not familiar with each other. Because we are on the same journey, we encourage each other. From today on, we will just be passing strangers in each other's lives. After being rescued, I lay on the ground exhausted. Draw a small sun on the soft snow. A mark unique to Eliza. As time goes by, my traces will be erased. But I was actually here. To love others, you must first love yourself. If you are stuck in the mud, you can only save yourself. I think my own journey has just begun. 10. At Wesley's mother's birthday party. Jane, wearing a dark blue dress, stood with Wesley's mother. Those attending the banquet were either rich or noble. Wesley stood at the edge of the crowd, staring at the night in a daze, as if this bustle had nothing to do with him. Passers-by raised their glasses to congratulate. Congratulations to Mr. Spencer for finding his beautiful girlfriend. Yes, this day is also the auspicious day when he and Jane get engaged. People thought that little Spencer was always so happy that he forgot everything and drank one glass after another. The drunk Wesley hugged Jane and called my name. This is the live video Mia sent me. The incident that day was a big fuss and Jane left crying. Wesley was beaten by his father and sent directly to the hospital. Eliza, I didn't know you and Spencer had a history. And I keep talking to you about Jane. You must have been very sad at that time. On the other end of the phone, Mia apologized to me. I shook my head and said it was all over. To this day I understand. Wesley never treated me as an equal. Maybe he has some feelings for me. But it was only a few points. He can work with Jane for the benefit of the family, or he can use means to force me to surrender for his own selfish desires. He brought me here and he has the power to take it all back. My real estate was inexplicably blocked and most of my fund stocks evaporated. Recalling that early morning text message, "Come back to me, and all this will still be yours." Coercion and inducement were once our means of dominating the business world. Now, he uses it against me, someone who once fought alongside him. I smiled indifferently, removed the SIM card and threw it into the trash can, walking against the light towards my next stop. 11. In the hospital, Wesley was wrapped in bandages. The assistant stood trembling beside him, bending over as he reported to him. Ever since the boss publicly announced his relationship with General Holmes at his engagement party, he has changed from his usual calm self to a more irritable one. The general manager's office was also miserable. It was in contact with foreign countries almost all day, monitoring everything Eliza did abroad and reporting every detail. Holmes always lost contact with her. Avalanche buried underground, no. Wesley's heart trembled violently, and his pupils almost lost focus. Before the assistant could finish his words, a cup brushed past his forehead and fell to the ground. Bullshit. Get lost. Wesley went crazy and went to check it out himself with a brace, ignoring the broken ribs that had not yet healed. The reply I received was still that this person was out of contact. The news was reporting that a small town in Western Europe was buried in an avalanche caused by extreme weather, and rescue operations were underway. She'll be fine. Wesley shook his head and consoled himself. She's the most cunning one. She must have hidden herself away. Wesley ignored the advice and immediately asked someone to prepare a private plane. He had to go to Northern Europe as quickly as possible to bring the person back. But before he even walked out of the hospital gate, he was carried back to the ward. In order to prevent his injuries from getting worse, Wesley's mother had to tie Wesley to the bed and inject him with a sedative. She had never seen her son so crazy and out of his mind. Wesley once brought the girl home, but the girl was born in a poor family, had a heavy mind and was not clean enough, and she carried too many things on her shoulders. Wesley's mother has lived for most of her life, and has seen the methods used by women like this around her husband. She just doesn't want her son to go through that again. Mom, please let me go find her. Wesley, who was emaciated and unrecognizable, begged while lying on the hospital bed. She softened her heart and promised her son that she would find the person back as long as he recovered from his injuries. The Gu family used all their connections but to no avail. They only found a diary and a pregnancy report. Reports show that Eliza is more than 3 months pregnant. Wesley's eyes turned red and he opened the diary with trembling fingers. Wesley, you once said that lovers who have seen the aurora will meet again in the next life. It's a pity that we never met and got separated. I brought my baby to see it. The aurora is beautiful. If you were there, you would definitely be shocked by the wonders of nature. Well, I'm pregnant. Even though you took precautions, this life still came secretly. Is this because our bond has not been broken in some way? I want to go back to China to find you and tell you about the baby. I am obviously a victim of growing up in this kind of environment, but at this moment I had the bad idea of using the child to keep you. I canceled my return flight after hearing the news about your marriage to Jane. I want to share with you everything I see and encounter during my trip, even if it's just a cloud. In the past, I would never have dared to think about it. I knew the gap between us, so I didn't dare to stop for a moment before I dared to muster up the courage to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. The heavy snow is swallowing us up. My baby and I may never be able to go back. This is God's will. My unborn child and I have never been expected. Wesley on the hospital bed had already burst into tears. The date was February 20th, their 10th anniversary together. The last line of the diary is, "Wesley, I wish you a happy wedding and a baby soon." 12. Wesley seemed like a different person, staring out the window with a dull look in his eyes. These days, Wesley recalls every moment with Eliza. They spent 10 years together. It was 10 years of days and nights, intertwined and supporting each other. He had already fallen into it and couldn't extricate himself, not only physically but also spiritually. After spending a few days with Jane, he finally understood. What he wants is not the gentleness and kindness that revolves around him, but, with just a glance from him, someone would overcome numerous obstacles and move forward in the same rhythm as him. But he lost the person, including their children. What was he doing then? Oh, he's too busy being engaged to someone else. Wesley's heart felt like it was going to explode when he thought of this. The uncontrollable scream pierced his chest and he was on the verge of death. Wesley was lying in bed, relying on nutritional supplements to keep him alive. Gideon came to visit him several times, and seeing him on a hunger strike, he couldn't help but curse. What were you doing before? Now that he's dead, why are you pretending? Wesley struggled to get up after hearing the voice, but due to lack of strength, he could only stiffen his neck and refute. She's not dead. She's not dead. She and the baby are fine. If Wesley hadn't looked like he was about to die, Gideon would have wanted to beat this guy up. Then go find her. Who are you pretending to be dead for? Hearing this, Wesley seemed to be energized. He asked someone to bring him food and stuffed it into his mouth without hesitation. His stomach had been damaged for a long time, and he could only kneel on the ground and vomit. Jane sees that Wesley is getting better and comes to visit him. Although she felt uncomfortable about Eliza's matter, the person was already dead, and it was really cheap to argue with a dead person. What's more, in marriages between wealthy families, there are countless cases of couples playing with each other. Wesley is a handsome man with a wealthy family, and I am really attracted to him. Think positively and love will grow over time. On the negative side, she had been exposed to the methods used by the wealthy since she was a child, and could handle about 70% of them. As long as you have children by your side, you will have no worries in your future life. However, as soon as he entered the door, Wesley grabbed his neck tightly. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have taken the child abroad. How dare you show up in front of me? It was you who harmed her. The force tightened, and Jane couldn't even scream for help. Wesley was crazy, completely crazy. If Wesley's mother hadn't arrived in time, the consequences would have been disastrous. Gu's father was furious and ordered the person to be sent to closed treatment. While Wesley was recuperating, he was lying in wait for an opportunity to escape. Finally, one day, when the medical staff were slack during their shift change, Wesley sneaked out and ran towards his former lover without hesitation. I searched year after year on the snow-capped mountains. 3 years later, I am on vacation on a small island in the southern hemisphere. Doubting who was standing by waved his chubby hands and said, "Please buy me an ice cream. Please." The young man who was applying sunscreen to me chuckled. "Call me Daddy and I'll buy it for you." Dad, Dad, Dad. Don't spoil him. If he gets cavities, there will be trouble again. Before I could finish my words, the big one and the small one had already run away happily. I put on my sunglasses speechlessly and continued to sunbathe. The skin on his back suddenly tightened, and the force of his palm moving became much stronger. I frowned in dissatisfaction. Hissed gently. The breathing behind me seemed heavier, but I didn't pay any attention to it. It was just that the warm palm suddenly pressed hard along my spine, at the depression 3 inches below my lower back. I couldn't help myself and cried out. Fortunately, there were not many people around, so it didn't reach the point of social death. I turned my head angrily and met Wesley's face, which was suppressing his anger. He was thin with dark circles under his eyes, and it seemed that he had not had a good rest for a long time. Do you know how long I've been looking for you? Wesley choked up. I thought you really. What? Are you unhappy that I'm still alive? I calmed down. Wesley stared at me with red eyes, and the grievance in his voice trembled uncontrollably. I thought since I couldn't find you in the human world, I went to look for you in hell. If someone hadn't said they saw you here, you would never see me again. And then? Are you some kind of golden nugget? I stood up and left with an expressionless face, but Wesley grabbed my wrist tightly and pulled me into his arms. I've been looking for you for 3 years. For 3 whole years I could only hold the notebook you left for me to get through the long cold nights. For you I don't want anything. Even though I knew you were lying to me, I still gave in to your shamelessness. I just want us to go back to the way we were before. Isn't my sincerity enough? You're just going to abuse my feelings for you like this? Wesley's eyes turned red and he yelled in despair. Eliza, do you have a heart or not? While Wesley and I were struggling, I don't know when the little guy came back and poked 2 ice cream cones on Wesley's knees. The sticky cream blended into the fabric of his suit. You big bad guy, let me go. Wesley lowered his eyes and stared at the little kid whose eyebrows and features were somewhat similar to his, and a hint of tenderness flashed in his eyes. Mine. Before I could respond, the little kid called out from a distance. Dad, come quickly. There are bad guys. Wesley's face darkened and he uttered a few words through gritted teeth. You made my son call someone else Dad. When Mike Lee came back, he punched Wesley. Blood oozed from the corner of Wesley's mouth. He raised his hand to wipe it off and stopped the bodyguard behind him who was ready to fight. Eliza, come back with me. Otherwise I'll kill this pretty boy. Mike Lee was young and hot-tempered, and he started yelling immediately. You old thing. How dare you threaten me? When the Lee family's special guards heard the young master speak, they gathered around him. His family has the financial strength, but I don't dare to get too involved. Our child is gone. I didn't say anything else, I just pulled doubting and turned away. Wesley and the bodyguards behind him rushed forward and were stopped by Lee's special guards. Don't go, you said you loved me. That diary, I don't believe it's all fake. The hoarse voice behind me echoed in my ears. 3 years ago I was monitored all the time and every step I took was blocked. I had no choice but to bribe my connections and block the news from spreading, and gave Wesley a big gift. I want him to remember me all the time, to remember how I and his child died in despair, while he was having a passionate affair with his new love. His guilt will be magnified infinitely, and every day thereafter, the guilt aroused when he touches happiness will follow him for the rest of his life. What was recorded in that diary was half true and half false. Xiao Doubting's mother is my partner, and I adopted Doubting as my godson. Wesley still didn't give up and secretly took some of the little kid's hair for testing. The test results made him depressed for a long time. He had to accept that our child was gone. Went to another family on the day he and Jane got engaged. A family with loving parents. 14. Wesley did not return to China, but he found out my address. Compared to looking for a needle in a haystack 3 years ago, I'm not surprised that he can find these now. I have let it go long ago. After all, 3 years have passed and there is no need to hide from him. Eliza, give me a chance to make it up to you, okay? Wesley stopped me. The man I knew was always arrogant and condescending. At this moment he bent down to me and prayed. I paused, looking at the man who had been with me, with a cold expression. If everything can be made up, then what is the desperate me 3 years ago? Wesley, we are all adults, please be polite. I paused, remembering what he had said to me before. Let's part ways in peace. Wesley wanted to go forward but was stopped by my assistant Leon. Sir, please respect yourself. Leon's tone was gentle, but he was intimidating without being angry. If you continue to pester us, we will take legal action to have you deported. Leon opened the back seat, raised his hand to protect my head, and helped me into the car. Wesley gritted his teeth at Leon's overly intimate actions. Who are you? After closing the car door, Leon calmly handed the business card to Wesley. I'm Leon, Holmes' personal assistant. If you have anything to say, please contact me in advance to make an appointment with Holmes. The car moved forward steadily and I looked back. Wesley clenched his fists and stared in the direction we left. I couldn't help but laugh and teased Leon, who was sitting in the passenger seat. Lingzhu, you seem to be so well behaved, but I didn't expect you to be quite good at making people angry. Leon had no expression on his face. This is my job. TSK, not funny, not interesting. I lowered my head to work on the documents. In a corner that I can't see, Leon stared at the figure in the rearview mirror and clenched his fists. 15. Thanks to Leon's actions, I rarely see Wesley anymore. I affirmed his work ability and increased his year-end bonus by another 2%. Leon still had no expression on his face. He brought a cup of brown sugar water and a hot pack and placed them on my desk. I slapped my head and realized that it was no wonder I had been so irritable these days. It turned out that it was my menstrual period. I collapsed on the sofa and Leon placed the lunchbox in front of me. Why isn't this the restaurant I usually eat at? Leon took out chopsticks and a spoon from his lunch bag and handed them to me, saying slowly, "This is the chicken soup I made. Don't eat takeout these few days." I curled my lips. It was hard to refuse the soup I made myself. But I'm losing weight recently. Just when I was in a dilemma, Leon had already filled a bowl and handed it to me, saying softly, "I've skimmed off the oil in the soup so you won't get fat." I couldn't help but sigh. Whoever becomes your wife in the future will have to set off firecrackers to celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights. Leon lowered his eyes and watched me drink the soup, with a flash of emotion in his expression that I didn't understand. He opened his lips and was about to speak when he was interrupted by 2 childish voices. "Godmother! Godmother! Eliza! My godson and I are here to see you." Little Bean and Mike Lee flew over, but Leon blocked them in front of me and caught them steadily. "Godmother, can you accompany me to the amusement park?" The little kid hugged my legs. I covered my aching stomach and forced a smile. "How about another day? Godmother is not feeling well today." Seeing this, the little bean rolled his round eyes and shouted happily, "I have a sister, right?" The chubby face rubbed my belly. "Godmother, you finally agreed to let Godfather give birth to a sister for me." I glared at Mike Lee, who was cowering on the side, poking his finger and pretending to be a coward. Leon stood up, grabbed the little kid's collar and carried him out. "Uncle Leon prepared some summer homework for you." When I came back, I had just scolded Mike Lee for not messing around with doubting. When Leon saw Mike Lee wanted to drink chicken soup, he walked over and snatched the soup away. "Leon, what do you mean?" Mike Lee frowned in dissatisfaction. Leon had a cold face and twitched his lips slightly. "This soup tastes like lamb's tail." Oh shit. 16. The next time I saw Wesley was in the conference room of my company. As a customer, I don't accept charity, but I don't refuse what I get in return. Wesley has changed his ways and is now businesslike, with nothing to fault. Mike Lee, on the other hand, became more and more unreasonable and sat in my office every day. Wherever I go, he follows. But there's nothing I can do about it. He and my partner are distant relatives. He is of Chinese and British descent, and the youngest son in the family. A young master who is loved by everyone. I lost my temper on countless occasions when he interrupted my project meetings with Wesley. Mike Lee was stunned for a moment, and his European peach blossom eyes were instantly filled with grievance. I won't do that again. Since then, Mike Lee has been quiet for a while. He no longer wore his leather jacket and wore a suit instead. The long hair that reaches over the ears is sprayed with hairspray, which unexpectedly gives her a calm temperament. The children dressed up very nicely. Mike Lee put the contract on the table and retorted, "I'm not a child. I'm all grown up." I don't know what motivated him to run away, but he returned home and inherited a company and wanted to come and discuss cooperation with me. When talking about work, he felt sleepy, hungry, and drowsy. Whenever anything had anything to do with Wesley, he would immediately become alert, like a puppy guarding its food, squinting his eyes and not hiding his malicious intent at all. Although I felt vaguely uneasy, I just assumed that he was just throwing a tantrum. Until the celebration party when the project was successfully completed. Wesley raised his glass and clinked it with mine, his eyes deep. "Eliza, we're still as compatible as ever. It's not an exaggeration to describe us as a perfect match. Before he could finish his words, the lights suddenly dimmed and a soothing and romantic concerto began. When the lights came on again, Mike Lee walked towards me holding an Ecuadorian rose. He knelt on one knee in front of me and held a diamond ring in front of me. "Eliza, will you marry me?" I quickly pulled him up and lowered my voice. "You're crazy. I'm 11 years older than you." Mike Lee shook my hand back, saying in an aggrieved tone, "Do you dislike my young age? I've grown up. I can be mature and stable." I sighed and gently pushed his hand away. "You don't have to change for anyone. I just treat you as my mischievous little brother." Mike Lee's eyes dimmed for a moment, then hope rose again. "Then you should get used to treating me as your lover." When I didn't know how to respond to make him give up, Leon took off his coat, put it on my shoulders and took me off the stage. I breathed a sigh of relief when I returned to the villa. Leon brought me a bowl of calming tea, turned around and stood behind me, gently rubbing my temples with his fingertips. "Thanks. It's my job." My partner called me. I pursed my lips and pressed the answer button. "You're good. Stop teasing me. I'm going crazy." Mike Lee, a Chinese-British hybrid, 187 centimeters tall, worth hundreds of millions. How come he is not worthy of you? I'm 11 years older than him. He's just a little brat. Mike Lee's voice could not help but come from the other end. I'm not small. Eliza, I really like you, I really like you. Mike Lee wanted to say something else, but was interrupted by Doubting's mother. He's 19 years old. It's different here than in China, so he can get a marriage certificate. If you are worried about his family, don't worry. His family is very open-minded and will let Mike Lee do whatever he wants. Even if you become a scumbag again, his family can still cover for him. He didn't force me to say these things. What I said is the truth. 17. 30 years old is the right age to make breakthroughs. I rejected Mike Lee with all my heart. He still didn't give up and stayed in my company in the name of work, secretly competing with Wesley. I had no choice but to try to avoid them both and let Leon connect with them. Leon always made arrangements and I had a comfortable time. But such good days will soon come to an end. Wesley had been drinking and was acting crazy outside my house. "Eliza, what will it take for you to forgive me? I'll give you everything I have, all of it. Come home with me, okay?" Mike Lee was also joining him in the fun. "No one wants your dirty stuff even if you throw it in the trash." "Eliza, don't take his, take mine. Mine is very clean." I pinched my eyebrows and peeled off the mask I had just applied. Resisting the urge to slap everyone outside, I called Lee's house and asked them to pick up the drunk Mike Lee. The quarrel outside the door continued. Wesley didn't actually regard Mike Lee as an opponent, but he was a little wary of Leon. He deeply agreed that Eliza didn't like this kind of noisy young man. In terms of both character and ability, he is much more stable than Mike Lee, a young master who lives off his parents. Wesley snorted coldly. Mike Lee became angry immediately after being provoked by his love rival. "You're old and crippled and you're still humming." Wesley's sore spot was touched, and his anger rose along with the alcohol. "I have been in a relationship with Eliza for 10 years, and we have a child together." After saying this, Wesley was stunned for a moment. It seems that he has very little competitiveness left, and now he has a tendency to give up. "That means you didn't win her heart. That shows how bad you are." Mike Lee responded without hesitation, pushing the person outward until the dazed person fell to the ground. When I opened the door, the Lee family had just arrived and took their young master away. I had never seen Wesley look so lonely. He collapsed on the ground with a hurt look on his face, and the look he gave me was full of despair. "Eliza, you know what? During the 3 years I was looking for you, I often had dreams. I dreamed that the child was crying miserably, waving his hands and asking me why I didn't want it. My heart feels like it's been ripped out. I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm really sorry." Wesley covered his eyes and eyebrows with one hand in an attempt to preserve his remaining dignity, but tears began to seep out from between his fingers. I sighed and said, "Go back and don't come to see me again." "We can't go back either." Recalling his former high spirits after 3 years of mental torture, now in his early 30s, his shiny black hair has grown a few silver strands. I feel more and more upset, and I want to end this evil relationship once and for all. Wesley knelt on his knees and grabbed the corner of my clothes. Please give me another chance. My life is in your hands, please have pity on me. Forgive me, please. I didn't look back. Silence is my answer. It is enough to fall once in the same place. The past cannot be changed, but the future can still be pursued. 18. Wesley could no longer suppress his surging emotions under the streetlight. He clutched his shirt around his chest, curled up in a corner and wailed. He could only watch his lover gradually fade away. Eliza had her back to him and never looked back. Once upon a time, he thought that separation between life and death was the most painful. An encounter that is within reach and yet so far away is the most torturous and painful. The person who had gone away was once the gold he had dug up when he was young. But now that piece of gold no longer belongs to him and has completely abandoned him. In the corner without his support, gold still emits its charming luster. He had to admit it. Eliza is still doing well without him. He has never been the only one. In this entanglement, he was the only one who stayed where he was. Stay there forever and ever. End of full text.